1, 2, can anybody hear me? Alright, cool. Alright, cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Only got one eyeball left, okay?
Good evening, everyone. This is CCP Soundwave. Welcome to our second live dev blog. We had one previously with a lot of game designers from CCP talking about what's currently going on in EVE Online and what's to come. Tonight, we have the pleasure of being joined by some of the people who take care of the backstory. They write the fiction, the chronicles, the books, sometimes seedy erotic fan fiction sent around the office. We have the content people, the guys who do missions, mission sites, all that other cool stuff. I think we're going to start out with the fiction people here tonight, though. Let's say hello to CCP Tony G. How are you tonight?
How you doing, Soundwave? I'm fine, thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm feeling fantastic. How about you? What have you been up to today? What's a day in Tony G's life like?
Well, until this past Sunday night, certainly for the last 6 months, it's been kind of a whirlwind. I actually just finished writing the second book. Right now, I've actually moved on to, it's March Madness right now. We've got a lot of stuff going on in the company, particularly on the corporate side and the marketing side, and of course there's all the stuff going on in dev, which I'm kind of standing on the outside and watching in right now, but it's just a lot of exciting things happening here at CCP.
Yeah, it certainly is, and we will definitely come back to that novel just a little bit later. We also have CCP Abraxas with us. How are you doing?
Hey there, I'm doing just fine. Nice to be here.
So, what are you up to at the moment? What's going on in your world? What can the players expect to see?
They can expect to see the Immersion project coming out sometime. After we went on the Chronicles, we shifted focus a little bit, so I've been mostly working on this secret piece of thing that's going to be both in and out of game that I'll get to sometime later in the dev talk.
Yeah, I was just about to say, hopefully we can make that just a little bit less secret as we progress. We also have CCP Naughton. How are you doing?
Not bad at all, thanks. How are you?
I'm feeling fantastic. So, novels, immersion projects, all kinds of stuff. So, what's your role here at CCP? What part of the show are you in?
Well, I'm a senior writer for EVE Online. Been here just about 7 years, working on several aspects of EVE's backstory and development, both writing and editing fiction and in-game news, doing live events, maintaining backstory consistency, designing dungeons, writing missions, writing ad copy, just pretty much a whole grab bag of stuff. Right now, though, my primary responsibilities are all sorts of content writing tasks and backstory consistency. Yeah, that's about it.
Sweet. We'll get back to you. I think we're going to start out with Tony G here. We have the novels, all the impact on the storyline, a few of the questions we've gotten from players. If we start with one from Freelancer117, the previous novels about EVE Online really helped me to get a rich insight into the universe. Could you please tell us anything about the upcoming novel?
Well, the TLDR is that the first novel tells the stories about the story about the first immortal soldiers of New Eden, effectively integrating Dust 514 into the CCP canon. Templar 1 kind of gives the title away. The first immortal soldiers of New Eden are called the Templars, and the Amarr Empire is the first of the nation states to deploy the technology.
Ooh, so starting to tell a little bit about Dust. So the Amarr were the first. There's a lot of interest about the Caldari society, though. We have a question from Dirk Smacker. who asks, the Caldari led by Tibus Heth are currently caught up in patriotic fervor, giving them a clear reason to think about the state ahead of the corporation. Before Heth, what methods did the chief executive panel use to keep the state united, given how fiercely competitive the Caldari people are?
Well, it's funny because one of the reasons why we created Tibus Heth is because that part of the old canon was never really clear to us either. We needed the Caldari to have a central figure to rally around, to represent the nation, to speak for the mega corporations, particularly when it came to addressing, its relationship with other nation states like the Federation. There has been some effort in the content team and in storyline to make that part of how the mega corporations operate a little bit more clear. I know that we spent considerable time establishing the banking system, for example. I think that as far as a unifying figure goes, Heth is a little bit controversial, but I also think that players are going to eventually, we'd like to see someday players have more of a say in how the leaders of these nation states actually progress through the storyline. That's our long-term vision for it. I think creating the NPC characters just for now was just really a stopgap measure, and just for the purposes of advancing the fiction until we reach a state where players can influence their histories a little bit more meaningfully than they can now.
Yeah, that's one of the things that sometimes goes around the office, how exactly we'll do that in the future. And I know that some of the players have also forwarded a few questions about that exact subject. But if we just stay on Heth for a little while here, the story that began with the Empyrean Age, Hamish Grayson really wants to know, it seemed like the storyline was set up for the eventual downfall of Heth, but it's just been hanging in the wind for a while now. Is there a plan or a timetable for that?
Well, the second book certainly goes into a little bit more detail about that. If we've given the impression that Heth's been set up for a downfall, again, the ultimate vision for Tibus is that players help contribute or to either his downfall or to keeping him in power. But suffice to say that the pieces are moving into place for this to happen. I think there's an undercurrent. I think the honeymoon for Tibus Heth is probably over. This is what happens to politicians and anyone that makes such an interest as grand as he did. And there's going to be some clues dropped in the actual game universe as time goes on, as we work our way closer to publication.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to what happens with the Caldari state then, and Shira Gladson asks if there's any intention to bring the conflict between Caldari and Gallente back to the forefront. He says he'd like to see Caldari take their home planet back permanently from those green tumor flying hypocrites. Harsh words.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I saw that particular combination of words in a sentence before. Green tumor flying hypocrites. But I would like to see it brought to the forefront more. But I think that those plans will evolve a little bit more after the book comes out, if they are to happen at all. There's a lot of good conflict going on in storyline, which we want to revisit, which we want to bring to the forefront. Let's not forget that the Amarr are still engaged in a bitter conflict with the Minmatar, and there's alliances being forged throughout this thing. There's certainly been opportunities for the pirate factions to participate in this conflict as well, even if we haven't done a very good job of making them visible to people yet. But we're working on those things right now.
And in connection to return to normal, Joan Dathlerin asks if we're ever going to see a return to normal for sites such as the Ishukone station and the Concord HQ in Uli. He says, while it's cool looking, it's starting to become immersion breaking that these stations are still on fire.
Yeah, I concur. It's definitely an immersion breaker, and it comes up repeatedly during during planning for art resources, but it keeps getting pushed down in priority because there are so many more important things that need tending to. Right now, I suppose if we put our heads together, we could come up with an imaginative reason why a fire needs to be burning for 3 years. But I'm right there in the same boat with you. I'd like to see it fixed up. I'd love to see signs of life around there. I think that knowing Tybus, though, he'd probably want to, even if the fire were to be put out, he'd want to keep that thing just the way it is, just as a reminder of what can happen when you spend too much time with or trust green tumor flying hypocrites.
I think CCP Headfirst kind of solved it. It's apparently about nanites that are keeping these space fires going forever. Pesky nanites always keeping things on fire in space. With regards to all the factions and the fighting, Jay Biko asks, are you aware that faction warfare and incursions have left those RP players that want to play the bad guys in support of their favorite pirate faction, like they're not really getting any love? Can people look forward to, will they be getting some features they can actually participate in and so forth?
Well, I think the primary issue with that is that features are game features are built to be to have indefinite longevity to them, along with with the mindset towards future iterations. I think that we use a lot of storyline to advance the introduction of a new feature to the game, but then once the feature is introduced, then the story kind of peters off, and that's kind of a reflection of the fact that the things like factional warfare and incursion at the present time aren't built to be as dynamic and reactive to player actions as we would like them to be. I know that Big Dumb Object and the content Headfirst and the rest of the content team are envision a time when we can absolutely make player, like someone could not necessarily win factional warfare, for example, but certainly create an event such that a storyline that's relevant to the NPCs could advance in a way that kind of reacts to what the players have actually accomplished. So it is a vision of ours. We talk about it often, but again, factional warfare itself isn't, the most urgent urgent priority for developers as it stands right now.
Yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, it kind of feels like we have a good setup for it. Like you mentioned that you'd like to see players take more control. We have faction warfare and we have incursions. I mean, is EVE just like a really like a sandbox that's in a good position to take this step, do you think?
I think it's in the perfect position to take that next step. I think between those two mechanics, between incursions and the setup for factional warfare, I think as a storytelling feature, I don't think we've ever had more potential in anything than we do with factional warfare. And though incursions right now it's based around the Sancha NPC storyline, in theory, the incursion mechanic itself can be applied to any faction. So, I mean, there are beautiful synergies between those two. It doesn't take much of an imagination to see how the two could be combined to create for something that's really, really, really dynamic. And again, it's just a question of fulfilling our present obligations, fulfilling our priorities, and as soon as we get the chance to, I think that it won't be a question of getting buy-in from the right people to make this happen.
I think that sounds absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, Tony G, for giving us some insight into the storyline, giving us a few hints about the book that's coming up. Now, of course, Tony isn't the only novelist we have at CCP. We've also got CCP Abraxas, who we're lucky enough to have with us tonight. CCP Abraxas, can I start off with the Immersion Project? We have quite a few questions about what this is. Can you just explain what this details and how it's going to unfold?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you a little bit of background, we've wanted for a while, not just to we wanted to integrate the EVE lore better with in-game content, but we've also wanted to make the story way more accessible to new players and not have them have to look in 5 different places to see what's going on. You know, the chronicles and news items and in-game text and so on. So late last year there was a bit of a change of focus in CCP where Torri Frans, who's the creative director, asked me to stop focusing on the chronicles and to focus instead on figuring out a way to make something like that happen, some kind of integration of lore. And he liked the ideas that I came up with, and they became basically the Immersion Project. And it's basically 2 things. It's a reorganization of the way that the EVE lore is presented, and it's also a way of bringing that lore much more directly to the player. And it's split basically into 2 parts. It's split into an Evilopedia section, Evilopedia being sort of our version of Wikipedia, and an in-game section. And the Evilopedia section, which we're working on right now, basically involves extracting all the lore previously published from all the venues in which it's been published. You know, the chronicles, the novels, the in-game text, the news items, even the FanFest plays, everything, and putting it all up on the Evilopedia and organizing in a very sort of cohesive manner. And later on, once we've gotten most of the pre-existing data in there, it's also going to involve expanding on various articles and various subjects and adding brand new lore so that you won't have to hunt it down in all those venues that you would have before. The in-game part of it, which will come along a bit later on, we'll basically get to it after the Evilopedia part is up and running, is initially going to involve taking certain in-game texts and basically adding a bunch of content to them, even creating new types of texts from scratch, like agent bios, maybe planetary fact sheets, and then putting links on those in-game texts that if you click them, they will send you to the relevant pages on those subjects on the Evilopedia. So you'll get lots of different venues and ways to explore the EVE lore, but it'll all be in one place for you to browse. This, by the way, just to be clear on it, this will not affect or slow down any other kind of content work or mission work that we're doing in-game. This is a project that's being run separately from all of those. So yeah, that's the Immersion Project in a nutshell.
That's very cool. We have some questions about the time frame for all this. Seraphin in Honorus asks, how far along is the Immersion Project or in-game codex? I mean, I guess people are looking for, is this going to be a space fire that burns forever, or when are they going to see some of this stuff?
Well, it's going really well, actually. I mean, I'm pretty reliable when it comes to delivering stuff on time, especially because the last thing I did before working on the Immersion Project was writing the chronicles, and I don't think I missed a single deadline for the last 4 years on those. That said, yeah, it's going really well. We've finished designing the Evilopedia part, and we're basically populating it with content right now. You can't see it because it's on a private server, but eventually we'll move it over and make it accessible to everyone. So that you're not going to see for a little while yet, but it's not incredibly far from looking release ready. And then the in-game part of Immersion is going to follow on after that. So that part is still in the design stages, and I really can't give any promises on how it's going to progress. Other than that, it's very well supported in-house.
So you already mentioned that some of this stuff will show up when you do show info on things, for example. Luella Dugans is very interested in knowing in whether or not this will extend to things like agent mission dialogues, smaller pieces of the whole, and so forth. It's
going to extend to as much in-game content as we can reasonably link it to. Right now the focus is on making fresh content, like agent bios, for example, rather than rewriting old content like mission dialogue. But we'll just have to see how it goes once we get more into the implementation of that part of the project.
So if we're jumping ahead a little bit and then kind of seeing how all this Evilopedia information ties together, Mkamin asks, will jumping on points lead us into a cohesive understanding of story, or will it be more like a Wikipedia-style series of articles? Like, I guess basically what he wants to know is he going to be browsing links on a Wikipedia, or will there be some like coherence where you can kind of go through sequentially?
There'll be definitely kind of a coherence. It won't be so much a series of articles as more of kind of a spider web. There'll be a central hub from where you can go in various different directions and explore various facets of the lore, like the technology behind various things, the cultures, the various empires, and so on. Where, as the name sort of indicates, aiming to make this as immersive an experience as possible, so that you may start off clicking one link about one of the holders in the Ymar Empire, and before you know it, you've got like 10 other links open on all kinds of subjects in Eve. And at every single point in the Evilopedia, you should know where you are, how you got there, and where you can go from there. We want to make this as easy a user experience as we can, as opposed to how it's been before, where all the data was available, but you had to trawl through countless pieces of text to find it.
Yeah, of course. But apart from this immersion project, which sounds incredibly cool, and I'm sure the players will be really happy about when we ship this, you've also done a load of Chronicles. That's probably what you're best known for at CCP. A lot of people are wondering about how they can access these instead of just going to the website. Cornwallis wants to know, will there be more Eve Chronicle podcasts from CCP? Why or why not?
Maybe. The reason we haven't done more Chronicle podcasts is because there's a lot of work that goes into recording them professionally, including choosing the right stories, because not all of the Chronicles are amenable to being recorded. It's something that's it tends to fall by the wayside every now and then because new projects crop up. For example, we were planning to do a bunch of podcasts a while back, and then I got the opportunity to do an Eve novel instead, so that took precedence for a while. But it's a subject that keeps coming up again and again and again, so I can't promise it, but it's definitely something we're still interested in.
What about the PDF files? I see Thanasis Vegos asking if we can please make a PDF bundles of all the stories so far and extract to the book so we can get a sample for them.
I can't speak to the books, but as regarding the Chronicles, we've been planning to do some kind of story bundle for a while now. And when I wrote the devlog on the Immersion project, I actually mentioned that I was going to make it my pet project. There is in-house interest in it, and we're still kind of hashing out the details, but something is definitely going to happen on that front.
Very cool. I think we also have a question about some specific part of the Chronicles. Asiv asks, what exactly is the Book of Emptiness other than a device/book that drives people crazy?
Well, that was its primary purpose, but for those that don't know, the Book of Emptiness is something that cropped up in a very long, in a long series of stories I did called Black Mountain, and again, in a two-parter that effectively closed out this current sort of scheduling of the Chronicles. The Book of Emptiness was, it's an attempt on my behalf to kind of talk a bit about faith and morality in Eve, which is a topic that I think is very complex and incredibly fascinating. And it was also kind of an authorial device that I invented that it allowed me to play with the boundaries between fictional characters and real-life characters, which is really kind of the same boundaries that the players themselves work on, and the boundaries that kind of the existence of the Eve Chronicles always revolved around. So it was kind of my closing word on that subject of the Chronicles for now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're gonna shift gears a little bit and maybe just grab all three of you and throw some questions out to some of you. Let's see what we have in our bag here from the forums. Maybe we should ask this one. This, I think, goes to Naughton. Is the process of cleaning up the backstory still continuing?
Yes, indeed. It is absolutely an ongoing process and will remain ongoing for as long as we keep adding new things to the game world. The way it's happened over these past couple of years is basically that when I've found the time, I've sort of extracted canonical facts from our fiction and then maintained them in a database where they're easily cross-referenceable. And through this process, managed to weed out a couple of our more annoying inconsistencies from the early fiction. And there hasn't really been anyone doing it besides me, so when I get called away to do something else, then it does sort of languish. But even though there hasn't been updates or quote-unquote patch notes on this in a while, the work on the database itself has still been ongoing. And as and when we find the time for it, you're going to see more updates and more retcons, more public ones. So the whole thing is definitely sort of submerged, but not forgotten.
If I could just ask another question to that, you mentioned some of the old fiction and the new fiction. Does this work apply to the in-game changes as well? So if something new is put in, does that get corrected as well, or how does that work?
That all canonical information will be put into the database one fact at a time. So you can cross-reference, you can do a search for any one phenomenon from the entire backstory, and you will get a collection of all the relevant data on that phenomenon. Hopefully that'll allow us to keep things smoothed out as we continue to add lore to the universe.
That does indeed sound like a very good way of maintaining it. If we can just grab one, and I'd like to get basically the take on this from all three of you. Arcady Sadik asks, how do you three see the future of Eve's backstory? Will we see more shadow-style evil creatures behind the scene? Will the story move more towards a clear-cut distinction between good and evil? Or will it move again back towards the dark universe of no good and evil and only like shades of gray? Maybe we should start with Tony G on this one. Alternatively, we can start with CCP Abraxas.
Well, I don't think there's a necessary choice to be made between having evil creatures or clear-cut distinctions or having shades of grey. I mean, the EVE universe can encapsulate all of these, and you can easily see it in, for example, the different writing styles that me and Tony have, where Tony likes to go for grand plots and these amazing larger-than-life events in space and characters and so on, whereas I tend towards a little bit more towards more sort of a moral grey side, moral grey areas. There's absolutely no reason why we can't have both in EVE to highlight all the aspects of the lore and all the aspects of the game. So asking whether the story is going to move more in one direction or the other, it can move in both directions at once. I mean, you can have Tony's novel have its emphases on good versus evil characters, and you may see some of the immersion stuff that I'm working on vary more towards Shades of Grey. It just depends on what I'll be working on at the time.
So what about you, Tony G? Do you agree? Do we have space for this like very, very broad ability to deliver fiction, or is there one direction we should be going in?
Well, the IP is painted dark, but at the same time we tried to create the Shades of Grey because the Shades of Grey create conflict, particularly inner conflict. But I think that going forward, our priority should always be, tell a damn good story, create opportunities for players to take a side, like the original poster suggests. The thing about Grey is that sometimes it could get in the way with conflict, and this game is driven by conflict. I think to a larger degree, our lives are kind of driven by conflict in some fashion, whether or not it's with ourselves or it's with an adversary. These are the things that kind of define who we are. And Eve is a very human story. If I can reflect back on the experience I had with writing Empyrean Age, I think that I was a little too obsessed with plot. The second one's a lot harder to write. I was warned it would be, and I think the biggest takeaway I got from the experience the first time around was that I didn't focus enough on people, about writing compelling characters that people could identify with, and I paid a lot more attention to that the second time around. I think that in the end, everything, no matter which style it is, whether it's Hjalti's or my own or some other writer that comes in, we've had a lot of guys submit chronicles, and they all were received very favorably. I think that we're all on the right track, and I think that it would be a lot to ask for any one person to kind of capture all of it, but I think everyone that contributes brings something different to the table where it concerns telling this very human story about Eve.
Yeah, definitely. Norton, what do you think about this subject? Are you in one boat or in the big picture thing?
Well, I think Eve has always been, to a very large extent, about the grit and the grime, and people sort of stuck in impossible situations where they have to choose the lesser of two evils, and both choices are just absolutely horrifying, that sort of thing. And I think our current creative direction probably veers more toward more shades of gray rather than any sort of preconceived notion of good and evil, even though we've had those kinds of characters play really valuable roles in our fiction. I mean, like Hjalti said, the universe of Eve is huge and has space for basically everything. But I mean, kind of moral relativism has been a pretty central tenet of our IP for pretty much as long as the IP's existed, and I don't really see that changing anytime in the near future. And our plot developments from every single one of our writers have always been directly inspired by history in the news, things happening in the real world. And the real world is messy and filled with people in groups careening off in different directions, bouncing off each other. And there's really no one group or cabal or whatever that's in charge. And there are no good guys and there are no bad guys. There's just interests and propaganda. And Eve should be the same thing. I mean, it already is to a very real extent because it's a living world filled with thousands of players who've organized themselves into groups based on that sort of nation-state paradigm. So I think the backstory is going to continue to develop in the direction that's most fitting and appropriate for this type of environment.
Talking about the direction and how you approach it, one of the things that we get quite a lot of questions about is how exactly does good storytelling fit in with game mechanics, because obviously those two need to be somewhat coherent for this to work. Katie Sadik asks, what are the thoughts of the designers of Eve fiction on this? Are you going to ignore the immersionist requirements more and more for the sake of telling good stories? Or will we have to miss out on good stories to keep the game world believable? What do you say to this, Abraxas?
I don't think we'll ever have to miss out on good stories to make the game more believable. I mean, the way in which we write may sometimes highlight game mechanics or touch on game mechanics. A lot of the chronicles that I wrote, especially with the first 2 years, were in some way, shape or form intended to introduce game mechanics, whether it was like Tech2 blueprints or whatever else. But it's easy, if you know what you're doing, to find a way to either write around game mechanics or explore them, even without necessarily being constricted to the way that the game works. I can write about what happens on board a spaceship, even though the player can't yet see inside that particular spaceship, but it's not going to mess up the way that that spaceship works in game.
How do you feel about this balance, Norton? Is it difficult?
Warp drive active.
We can skip to Tony G for that question as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just missed the name, I think.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, but basically, on the whole difficulties of having some constraints, I assume, from a game environment as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking specifically from the experience I had for a couple of years as a mission writer, this kind of touches on a really, really old problem that sort of has to do with the structure of the MMO and the way content is traditionally delivered. There's a huge investment of time required to write, create, and test new content, and that investment is just so tremendous that to circumvent the kind of problem where you have, to take the classic example from Eve, where you have the damsel with the secret pirate fetish who gets abducted 1,500 times a day, then you need to come up with more sort of modular ways of delivering the content so that the player, for example, won't get the exact same mission twice because there are elements of story delivery that are randomized or different every time, things like that. But at the same time, that comes pretty perilously close to branching paths, the kind of stuff we did with the epic arcs. And that kind of thing, even though it's really rewarding content for the player on the game side of it, still pretty much represents like the worst developer time investment to actual game value ratio that you can find out there. It's not very cost effective at all. So I guess to come somewhat closer to answering the actual question, until we get unlimited resources and unlimited manpower and unlimited tools to do whatever we want, it's always going to be a toss-up to some extent between these two things. But the hope, for me at least, lies in things like incursions and live events, where, if we can keep coming up with novel and dynamic ways like those of delivering content, then that will hopefully keep bringing us closer to a more unified, immersive experience for the player.
Tony G, I guess this is a really relevant topic for you, especially working on a new novel. Do you run into these issues in your daily writing? Do you sometimes just have to take a break and talk to people at CCP about how you approach it because of some game mechanic, or is it something that you don't really feel?
Well, I think it's a perpetual issue of, I don't want to say contention, but of reconciliation. I think that the truth is that not every game feature or mechanic is going to be completely reconcilable with the lore. I mean, I'll give you the perfect example. In EA, I used a Titan Doomsday weapon, as a plot device towards the end of the book, and that feature is no longer there. The mechanics of how Titans blow things up has been completely rewritten for good reasons, and those reasons need to move forward independently of the fact we published a book which states stuff to the contrary. So I think there's always going to be some state of suspended disbelief between what you read in the lore and what we can actually present in the game. There's a lot of examples, warping directly through planets instead of just flying around them. The way Stargates are oriented, you can approach them from any direction, even though the architecture of the things clearly show that they were designed to approach from one direction and get spit out in the other. These things make a lot of sense from a game mechanic perspective, but don't necessarily lend themselves well to good storytelling. So there is a golden path. The golden path is that we pick our spots where the mechanic does happen to align with a really good plot device. Keep in mind that we don't necessarily write the lore just for gamers. The lore is intended to grow the intellectual property. We believe there's a big audience out there for science fiction. I think that the audience is the greater science fiction world is ready for a new IP to really dig themselves into, really immerse themselves into rather, and Eve offers a lot for that. So I think that as we move the game forward, as we advance the game, of course we will always try to find ways to make it meaningful, to cross the two streams, so to speak, as best that we can. But there'll never be 100% parity between the two, I don't think.
There probably never will, but I mean, hopefully there's at least some connection between the the designers and the fiction writers, and Elaine Colser submitted a few questions, and one of these really touch on that. Tony G, when you're writing this stuff, do you integrate your work with the people creating NPC content, be it missions, market items, agent dialogues, epic arcs, exploration sites, all that? How much do you communicate?
We're all on the same team now. I mean, the content team and storytelling they're really one and the same at this point. All the guys in content have been given a draft of the book, for example. We have the person who wrote more than half the Chronicles, at least, if it's not 2/3 of them, is working on the Immersion project, which is technically part of the content initiative. We have Naughton's work, who's busy making sure all of it makes sense, and that we keep retcons to a minimum, but at the same time kind of consolidate everything that we have, because I think it's important for everyone to understand that at this stage in the game we're at an inflection point. One of the exact reasons why we're not producing too much new content right now is because we have Dust 514 and Incarnate coming down the pike, and we need to solidify our foundation and bolster it as much as possible before these IPs become an active everyday part of EVE's existence, because then it's really going to blow up in a good way, but at the same time, as a matter of creating consistency in the lore going forward, creating good canon that people can look back on and not see any inconsistencies like we've unfortunately created to this date and time, is very important to us. The IP really can't grow significantly without it. So yeah, when storyline and content really just one and the same at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the next questions we have also from you, from Elaine, is will you ever publish a sort of prime fiction directive where you address and describe in very broad terms the basics of each faction to an extent that players can understand how they work, how their culture behaves, their religious beliefs, and what their everyday lives might look like?
We have been working on a storyline Bible for a long time, probably about at least a year and a half, and the first draft of that was submitted and released internally to volunteers, and they vetted the material for us, or helped us to vet the material for us, and it's almost in a state where we're going to be ready to do just that. Essentially, there are write-ups that describe the history of each faction, speaks in broad strokes about the moral shades of gray, bringing out the positives of each nation and the negatives about them, but negatives only from the perspective of being objective to describe the whole thing inclusively. We realize that it's there. I think one of the aspects of the Immersion project, if not an extension of a greater consolidation effort, is that there really isn't any one-stop shopping place to just kind of digest all this stuff. It's very hard to kind of like point one person who's new. Maybe they came in through a chronicle, maybe they came in through a trial or whatever. Just like, hey, what can I read to really, dig into this stuff? And that's exactly what the Storyline Bible was conceived for. It also speaks to this question that was posed. It's like, where can we go to find this stuff? And the truth is that we have the content. It's just a question of, again, moving on up the queue in the list of things that we need to do, incorporating the feedback we've received on it so far, and ultimately finding a good place to put it. I could easily wander off on a tangent about the state of Evilopedia right now and how important it is to us to know long-term plans for all the content, but I'm not going to do that. Suffice to say that this kind of guide should be a stop along the content funnel, so to speak, for newcomers that are immersing themselves into the IP.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony G. If I could just grab a last one before we move over to our content people for Abraxas. Abrasar wrote a question: will the rogue drones ever become more than floating minerals, story-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they're a fascinating entity, and I think they're absolutely unique, even in a game like EVE that has a lot of special and unique types of lore. We have certain plans for them that I can't go into right now, but they're certainly not going to be made to lay fallow and just be harvested for the next few years and nothing else.
Okay, guys. CCP Naughton, Abraxas, Tony G, thank you very much for sitting with us here. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just about 10 minutes. It's the second segment of the show tonight. We have some of our content developers, basically the guys that build the missions, sites, write all the text on the objects and all the other clever creative stuff. We have CCP Big Dumb Object and CCP Head First. We're going to have a chat with them, so please don't leave. If you do leave, you'll literally have missed the entire show. You'll forget the first part of the show, and then tomorrow when you wake up, you'll be like, what did I do last night? And you simply won't have a clue. So if you want to know what happened in the devlog, you have to stay the duration. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Hi everybody, this is CCP Soundwave. I hope you enjoy your break. We're back with the second part of the live devlog right now. We have some of the most fearless, unified F-18s we can find in the office with us. We have CCP Big Dumb Object, CCP Head First. Big Dumb Object, how are you today?
I'm doing awesome. I'm hopped up on caffeine and Sudafed right now, and this is completely live, pumpkin, whatever the hell. Yeah, there we go.
That's great. So, for the people that don't know who you are, what do you do at CCP?
I am currently the product owner of the content team, which essentially means right now I'm partial team lead, partial management monkey. But I help guide the team along, fill out all the right dots, and help decide what content we're currently doing.
Fantastic. How about you, CCP Head First? How are you this evening?
I'm here. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm feeling fantastic. Thank you. You're the first person to ask. I think that means a lot to me. It's very nice to have you.
I like to think of myself as a people person.
You are. You're an excellent, fearless person, I think, at least. Anyway, back to the program. Let's talk some about the content that you guys make. There's quite a few questions about the process. How does this end up in game? How does it work? Elaine Colser, who's asked a few questions tonight, has from a developer standpoint, what sort of process does your team engage in to integrate content into the game? Do you focus more on mechanics or text or description, storyline, so forth? Big Dumb Object, what's the focus of your team?
The focus of our team actually shifts around pretty wildly depending on what the release is and what our focus is going to be. For instance, when we were focusing primarily on epic arcs back in Apocrypha and Apocrypha 1.5, it was very much writer focused. We were doing linear storylines that the writer did an entire arc and then level design followed that. Whereas sometimes the game design and level design comes first. For instance, the current project we're doing, the DED sites, is very much level design dictated, and then the writing content comes in after that. Right now, basically how we start off is we do a feasibility pass on what resources we have, then we take a look at what's most important to us, and we just decide, okay, we're doing that, and we map out the pipeline we have to follow to get that done. And then after that, it's just churning through the process and slapping everything together in a professional way.
After that, boom, winning. If we're to look at some of the larger scale stuff, CCP Tony G touched a little bit of where ideal Eve is, that players have a lot more influence. Players are part of this big universe that they can be a part of and shift in whatever direction they want. Achi Firestar wants to know if we've considered player-driven background-changing content. By this he means allowing players to get into positions of power, perhaps as president of the Gallente Federation, and kind of become a part of the official backstory. What do you say to this, Big Dumb Object?
We've considered things like that. There's a few different aspects to it. There's a difference between incorporating someone as this particular name is now part of our IP and brand, and the players have direct influence on how the story goes. It's much easier and much more likely for us to develop features that do the second, where players can dictate how the story is going and what the emotions of the larger plot elements are going to be. The first one we have to be really careful with, especially as EVE expands into multiple products. We want to have consistent names we can rely on, such as a Typus Heth or a Sancha Kuvaki, that Dust, Incarna, and any other products we may have upcoming can all refer to them just as easily. We've had instances before where players have taken part in live events and have even killed some important storyline characters, but we have to be very careful with mentioning them because our partners in some of these projects get very nervous when unfitting names show up in our copy. And we definitely don't want to go the route of controlling everyone's name, so we go the other way.
Yeah, that's definitely fair enough, and keeping everything together is of course one of the priorities. If we can just backtrack to an event that was in 2009 FanFest, which by the way is coming up this month. If you haven't got your tickets to FanFest now, you should probably get it. It's your one and only chance. Well, you'll probably get more chances, but it's one of the few chances this year at least to meet up with the developers, get them drunk and have them leak tons of information, talk about mining missions, talk about spaceship stats, whatever you want. At last year's FanFest, Imkin says that there was a player suggestion about dividing mission distribution based on the NPC Corp. Can we expect a revamp of the agent system?
Two parts of this one. Can we expect a revamp based on the NPC Corp? No. However, we are currently in the middle of an agent division revamp, and Soundwave's team is actually in charge of that right now. He's doing a great job for us. And we're focusing on making the agent divisions streamlined, more explicit, more comprehensive, so that when you go to a particular division, you're getting the mission type you want, not you're rolling the dice against our table and hoping you get the right one. There'll be more information of that as it comes up closer to release, and you'll be hearing more from Soundwave on that, but yes, we're definitely in the middle of that particular project.
Yeah, I should have just asked myself that question. CCP Soundwave, are there any plans to revamping the mission system? Well, Soundwave, that's a really good question. We're actually in the works trying to make the mission system more intuitive and better so you don't get those random dice roll missions. Anywho, back to questions that I should actually be fielding you. A large portion of the EVE mission runners run them for established factions in EVE. Are we going to see more missions for the pirate factions, for example?
The pirate factions are something we know we're kind of... There's more holes in pirate factions than there are in most of the other factions. And it was, to be honest, was very nearly our project for this release. But after comparing the two, the DED sites were the higher priority for us for various reasons and the resources we had available. But filling in more pirate missions is a high priority for us and will happen in the near future at some point.
What about the epic arcs? They're very popular, and Radic Salivinis wants to know if there's going to be more epic arcs. You started with 5 very promising arcs, and many people are hungry for more.
The epic arcs are very expensive for us to develop. During the 2 releases where we worked exclusively on epic arcs, it took all 4 writers and all 4 LDs to produce the content that we did. So right now, because of all the number of projects we're involved with and branching our guys out into, more explicit epic arcs of the variety we've already published are currently not an immediate future thing. However, the Epic Arc system is being reused by several features. I know the NPE experience that is currently being tweaked at right now is using the Epic Arc system, for which it's entirely well designed for. And we'll be seeing more things, I imagine, that use the Epic Arc system without being explicit Epic Arcs themselves.
What about Cosmos? I mean, we get quite a lot of questions about it, and just from watching the live dev blog chat as well, Cosmos comes up here while we're talking about this. Loki Nahat asks, Cosmos, are you going to sort it out? Great lore and content's all there, just needs tweaking and fixing.
Unfortunately, Cosmos is as expensive for us to modify as the Epic Arcs are. And actually, the kind of fixing up that we were hoping to do, importing them into the Epic Arc system, is even more expensive. And so right now, our best use of our resources is to keep Cosmos running as best we can, fix any problems that come up. But a full-scale revision of Cosmos is not on the books right now.
Okay, I think we're going to grab one last question for you, Big Dumb Object. It's from Elaine Colser again. First of all, he wants us to know that he very much appreciates the work that your team has put into the landmarks of EVE. He says it's added variation from system to system. And the Cosmos in particular was an old initiative to paint the galaxy. Are there any considerations to keep painting it?
There's two different types of ways we can paint the universe further, and there's regional content and static content. Static content, things like landmarks and static sites like that. We currently have no plans to do another pass like we did a few releases back, to just do large swaths of them, but I'm not going to rule out the possibility of doing case-by-case static sites as we've done in the past. Like, we did a couple of static rodent sites when that storyline was ramping up. We've done graveyards from time to time. So little things like that that come up that are fairly cheap for us to sneak in, we can definitely do, but we're not making a major project of that. The other idea of regional content, which is other types of not really static content, but content that is localized to areas of space, is a major theme of our brainstorming and planning, definitely. And we're going to be moving more and more in that direction as we go on.
Okay, thank you very much, Big Dumb Object. I think we're going to move over and see what Head First is up to here. This is right up his alley. It's about live events, something that a lot of players feel is the lifeblood or tiger blood of CCP, and they're really happy to see it back, and they've been very well received. Guzo Ku asks, I'd like to know more about live events and the future plans for them. I enjoyed the Sancha Invasions a lot, and I think it was a great way of introducing a new mechanic and lore behind it. I also wonder if we'll be able to help NPC factions and corporations in a tangible way someday. For instance, help the Sisters of Eve get closer to solving the mystery of the Eve Gate, and so forth.
Well, definitely you'll be able to help NPC factions in a big way, and in fact, during the Sancha live events, I think people might not have realized how much they were helping Sancha Kuvakai as they were fighting for or against his precursor incursions, as it were. When the finale event took place in Yulai and then later in Promised Land, a big part of that outcome had to do directly with how many players were involved and what they did. So I guess that's part of this question, is something that's already been happening, and based on the positive feedback we've gotten from that, will probably happen a lot more in the future, especially when we pick other factions to run with for the live events. And I guess I should say on Dropbear's behalf here that we're already planning to use a different faction with the next live events. The one that we're pretty much banking on right now should have everybody really interested, but unfortunately I can't say anything more about that potential plotline right now.
that kind of goes a little bit into Luella Dugan's next question, who wants to know if the live events will cover other groups and factions, especially ones like the Equilibrium of Mankind. On a related note here, Equilibrium of Mankind was actually one of the first factions chosen to do incursions, but it later ended up as Sanchez. That's a little piece of EVE knowledge there that I can just throw out, like the EVE knowledge king man I am. Anyway, let's skip that question because you've pretty much covered that one. What about... will there be future live events and relating arcs in EVE? Will there be a new arc related to Sancha, Dust 514, for example, with Incarna being released?
I can't really comment on any live events that may take place in or around Dust 514, but there will definitely be a part 2 or epilogue to the Sancha live events that the interested people should be looking forward to. But actually, I did want to go back and touch on one of the earlier questions that you just asked there. There were 2 parts to it. You wanted to know if other smaller factions like Equilibrium of Mankind would be used, and something that I wanted to say relating all the way back to the first question. When you were talking about how the EOM was the first choice for incursions and it eventually switched to Sancha, that is entirely because of player response to the live events. I'd have to say, and it probably would have been the EOM had not thousands of people come out and participated in these events and really enjoyed them and to a certain extent been so fervently for or against Sancha Kuvakai during the incursions. And then there was a second part of that question that I wanted to address where Luel asks if she'd like to know if we had any plans for smarter, tougher, but most importantly, fewer NPCs to appear in future PvE things. And definitely, absolutely definitely, the smarter NPCs that we developed for the incursion dungeons will definitely see more use in future live events. Probably one of the only pieces of negative feedback we received for live events was that when they got big, they got a little laggy, and I think smarter, tougher, fewer NPCs will go a long way towards alleviating that.
Yeah, and we'll certainly see more of the very popular live events. You could see it from our devblog channel as well. It's definitely something that our players enjoy, and they are really, really cool. What if we shift to something that's on the radar now? We just had devblog about Incarna. Maybe we should just grab a few questions about Incarna, because that is coming up. You know, we gave you the feet to walk, and now we're going to give you the floors. What about the tattoos? Mara Rin asks about cataloging Minmatar tattoos. Is there any work on this? Will she be able to go out and find all these things and keep them somewhere?
I believe tattoos are one of the things that we're definitely working on. You'd probably have to talk to somebody on the character creator side of Incarna. I'm only doing the level design for it, but I've seen hints of that in there, so...
So what you're saying is you're not drawing tattoos?
I am not personally drawing tattoos. I am by no means an artist.
I'll tell you right now, I'd get a tattoo that you've drawn. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, I did hint earlier, before the live devblog began in the channel, that we would in fact be shipping a Sharpie marker to all existing Minmatar players, and then they could, on their own computer screens at home, draw their own Minmatar tattoos.
And simply keep the character in that exact spot so you could see it. I think that's a very unique and first-time expansion. Anyone would ship that. I think you're a visionary. Anyway, let's get back to the questions. Vincent Athena is really interested in Incarna. What's actually happening between docking and appearing on the balcony? To do this fast, it would seem you'd change something from the previous Incarna teaser.
Oh, no, that is definitely up my alley. One of the things that we are very cognizant of and we handle very delicately is any changes that we make to existing EVE gameplay. And while we do want the captain's quarters to be a really interesting part of the Incarna experience and to mesh seamlessly with existing gameplay, we're doing all that we can to minimize any sort of any impact that might have on performance. And which is, I tell you, very difficult, but our team has come a long way towards pulling that off. We're really excited about it. During our tests, everything is running really smoothly.
Very cool. Vincent is really interested in how you access things within stations. Can we access our stuff via implants wirelessly, or is it a hardwire connection that's the only option? And if it is the hardwired way, are those skin penetration just routes for infection, or so forth and so forth?
Well, the Incarna avatars do have the implant slots, or the jack-in slots, as it were, visible on their characters, which look amazing, I should add. As for accessing things wirelessly, we're toying around with the activation distances of various aspects of the captain's quarters. So going along with the post-humanism theme of EVE Online, I don't think it would be too far out of the ballpark to say that doing something like turning a television on from across the room just by thinking about it would be too far out of context.
It certainly seems silly if we don't have some sort of wireless. I mean, I have wireless right here, and yeah, you'd figure they'd be that far ahead in the future. Vincent has one last question. What other fiction and content is being added concerning pods, pilots, implants, and so forth, that the new Incarna experience all fits within the current flying in space experience we have now?
Most of that is actually covered in the revision of the new player experience that we're doing, where Drop Bear has been working extensively with the other designer on that team, or on the team that I'm on, I should say, with sort of revamping the NPE to give the player a closer connection to the pod itself, to really drive that. I mean, we call them capsuleers, but I would probably assume that a large portion of the EVE player base doesn't really understand what that means, especially new players. So it's definitely something we're starting with. So while I can't say that we're adding any direct fiction, like there's not really a novel or any new chronicles that are coming out in regard to the new player experience, you will have sort of in-context fiction. As you walk around the captain's quarters as a new player, you'll probably have a much better idea of what the capsule means to the game itself and to you as a capsuleer.
Very cool. If we're just to take some of the general questions, CCP Big Dumb Object, we have a question from Growlwolf. I'd like to know if you're ever going to make Eve a bit more like the lore in some certain ways. For example, Aura. I miss her lovely voice. Make it optional, like the buzzing noise on low shields, but I'd like it for her to inform me of my ship's status, shields low, being webified, locked, and so on.
I can't speak to the voice actress coming back. That's pay grades above me. But Aura is featuring more predominantly in content we're doing now. For instance, the new DED sites, Aura is being actively used more as a device we use to give you feedback. She's interpreting stuff for you. She's like, hey, shit's happening. I'm getting shot. Oh, crap. But, written much better than that because I'm on coffee right now. Yeah, you're going to be seeing a lot more of Aura, and there's a lot more Aura stuff coming up in, I know, the content that, oh god, what is your dev? Headfirst and Drop Bear are both working on as well.
Well, just kick right in here. Definitely, Drop Bear and the rest of Team Noobloob are incorporating Aura in the new player experience extensively, and we have plans to maybe make her show up in the UI when you're in Incarna, or just hanging around in the captain's quarters. We haven't quite decided on that, but you can definitely expect to see more of her. You might have to whip up a new character in the game to get the full dose of Aura that you're looking for, but she'll definitely be there. it appears Soundwave is having some technical difficulties getting back into the game and getting his voice activated here. So I guess I will just keep talking about Incarna.
Tony, talk Incarna.
Tony wants to talk about Incarna. There you go.
Technical issues at CCP. Who would have thought? I think that on a general note about Incarna development and the initial stages, I think people tend to underestimate what just focusing on the social enabling aspects of the quote-unquote feature. It's really too big to just call it a feature. I think people forget how much this is going to fundamentally change the experience of the game that all of us here are quite familiar with. Just there's a whole generation of players that are going to start their experience in EVE and not have to make the huge imaginative leap to personify yourself in the virtual world as a spacecraft. I mean, it's just if you just think about how an interaction in station, I saw it in scrolling around in chat before, people spinning their ships around in the station is probably going to go away as a thing to do when you're in the game. It's very difficult to kind of conceptualize. I mean, we tend to look at it purely from the filters of, okay, what is going to be on the actual release notes patch, but people can't, or rather people have a hard time seeing beyond, okay, how is this really going to change how I view the world, how it's going to, enhance the immersive aspects of when you're exploring this world, a face-to-face conversation, literally, instead of just chatting between ships and that sort of thing. And despite all that, these are just the first steps. We're in the process of taking a very, it's a huge step, technically, but it's the first of what will lead to a very, very big world. I mean, we're exposing a part of the universe that's there already, that we've certainly written about in the past, certainly talked about in the past, but we're only getting around to actually showing it to everyone physically or virtually in this context now. That said, I think that I predict is going to happen. I think that since we're kind of looking at Incarna through the eyes of the new player experience for the short term, I think that a lot of players are going to go back and try the new player experience from this perspective, because it's almost like reintroducing yourself to the game for the first time. I mean, my character, I started playing the game in 2003 when the servers first opened. And for me, and the other veterans that I've spoken to about this is an inflection point for the game. It changes everything fundamentally. It's a big, brave new world, and I think that if people stop thinking about it as something that's separate from EVE, it isn't separate from EVE. It's one universe. That's core to our IP. That's our brand of MMOs. This stuff all has meaning. It all connects under one universe. I think that veteran player base will come back and finally start to see where we're heading with all this. They'll see the possibilities for it. And back in 2003, the game was a lot sparser than it is today, and I think more people at that time, that many years ago, played it almost as much for the vision of what it could become than what it actually was at the time. And I think that we're finally, people starting to get, with the system that's complicated, introducing things in small steps, a short path, a short pace, but small steps makes the most sense. And as much as we're all eager to flip to the end of this book to see where everything goes, I think just these first steps will be immersive enough to really captivate you and explore the game in a way that you've never known before. But again, you have that perspective, and new players coming into the game post-Incarna will not. So I can't wait for it. Again, if the character creator is anything to go by, I lost myself for hours just messing around with that thing. I think that just is just a tiny peak of the potential that this small step for man, huge step for mankind actually has. I think it's going to be epic.
Thank you very much, Tony G. That's a very, very nice way to round this live devlog up. We are really looking forward to Incarna here, and I hope you guys share the enthusiasm. It is coming your way. It is going to be awesome, and hopefully it'll meld in and become the natural part of the EVE universe it is. For us here at CCP, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Tony G, Abraxas, Naughton, Big Dumb Object, and Headfirst for coming on. Thanks to Vivox for helping us and making this happen. And thank you to everyone who's listening. It's been a pleasure. This was the second live devlog, and hopefully we'll have many more to come. Fly safe.